I knew the moment I saw Brenda Patterson standing on my driveway with her arms crossed, and her mouth pursed like she'd been sucking on a lemon that my peaceful Saturday afternoon was about to go straight to hell. My name is Blake Richardson, and I've lived in Meadowbrook Estates in Scottsdale, Arizona for 5 years. It's one of those communities where everyone's lawn looks the same shade of green. Every house is painted in approved earth tones, and the HOA treats the covenant like it's the 10 Commandments carved in stone. I work as a mechanic at Rodriguez Auto Repair downtown, but I also do side work in my garage. Nothing crazy, just helping neighbors and friends with oil changes, brake jobs, basic maintenance stuff that people don't want to pay dealership prices for. Blake Richardson, Brenda said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. She was wearing her usual uniform, a pastel pink polo shirt, white capris, and tennis shoes that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. Her highlighted blonde hair was pulled back so tight it made her eyebrows sit higher than nature intended. "We need to talk about your little automotive operation." I wiped my hands on a rag and stepped out from under the hood of my neighbor Jerry's Honda Civic. "What automotive operation?" "I'm just helping Jerry with his brakes." "That's exactly what I'm talking about." She pulled out a folder from under her arm like a lawyer presenting evidence in court. Section 12. Paragraph 4 of the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowner Association covenant clearly states that no commercial business activities shall be conducted on residential property. You've been running an illegal auto repair shop out of your garage for months. Jerry, who'd been sitting on my front steps drinking a Coke, stood up nervously. He was a retired accountant in his 60s, soft-spoken and always worried about causing trouble. "Now hold on, Brenda. Blake's just doing me a favor. I'm paying him back by helping him with his taxes next month." Brenda's eyes snapped to Jerry like a hawk spotting a mouse. "A favor? I've seen at least 6 different vehicles here in the past 2 weeks. Mrs. Henderson's minivan, the Thompson boys' truck, and don't think I haven't noticed. You're charging people, aren't you, Blake?" "I charge for parts," I said, keeping my voice level. "And sometimes people insist on giving me something for my time, but I'm not running a business. I'm helping my neighbors save money. You know what dealerships charge for basic maintenance. I don't care if you're running a charity." She thrust the folder at me. "This is your official notice from the HOA board. You have 72 hours to cease all automotive repair activities on your property. If you don't comply, we'll begin fining you $500 per day and pursue legal action to place a lien on your home." My stomach dropped. $500 a day. I made decent money as a mechanic, but that would bankrupt me in weeks. "You can't be serious." "I'm completely serious. The rules exist for a reason, Blake. If we let everyone run businesses out of their homes, this neighborhood would turn into a flea market. Property values would plummet." She turned on her heel, then looked back over her shoulder. 72 hours, and I'll be watching." Jerry waited until Brenda was out of earshot before speaking. "Blake, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to cause you trouble." "It's not your fault," I said, but my mind was already racing. Brenda Patterson had been the HOA president for 3 years, and in that time, she'd made it her personal mission to enforce every single rule in the covenant with the enthusiasm of a medieval inquisitor. She'd fined the Martinez family for leaving their trash, cans visible from the street for more than 12 hours. She'd forced old Mr. Chen to repaint his house because the beige he'd chosen was 2 shades too dark according to the approved color palette. She'd even tried to ban Mrs. Rodriguez's garden gnomes before the rest of the board overruled her. But this was different. This could cost me my home. I finished Jerry's brake job that afternoon, refusing his offer of payment. My mind kept cycling through options. I could fight the HOA in court, but that would cost thousands in legal fees. I could just stop working on cars at home, but that would leave a lot of people in the neighborhood in a bind. The nearest honest mechanic besides me was 15 miles away, and most of my neighbors came to me specifically because they trusted me not to rip them off. That evening, I pulled out my copy of the HOA covenant and read through Section 12. Brenda was technically right. The language prohibited commercial business activities on residential property, but it also had exceptions for customary home-based occupations that generate minimal traffic and noise. I'd argue that what I was doing fell under that exception, but knowing Brenda, she'd twist it however she wanted. Sunday morning, I got a call from Tom Henderson. "Blake, I heard about what happened with Brenda. That's absolute garbage, man." Tom lived 4 houses down and worked as a real estate lawyer. We'd become friends after I fixed his wife's minivan when it died in their driveway last winter. "Yeah, it's a mess. I don't know what I'm going to do. Listen, I looked over the covenant last night. You might have a case to fight this. The business activity clause has that customary occupation exception. We could argue your case at the next HOA board meeting." "When's that?" 2 weeks. "But in the meantime, you'd probably want to stop working on cars just to be safe. If Brenda catches you violating the notice, it'll hurt your case." I thanked Tom and hung up, feeling only slightly better. 2 weeks without helping people, and then what? A board meeting where Brenda and her cronies would probably side with her anyway. The HOA board consisted of 5 people. Brenda, her best friend Margaret, who agreed with everything Brenda said, Stanley Chen, who mostly stayed quiet to avoid conflict, and the Roberts couple, who were reasonable but tended to defer to Brenda's expertise on covenant interpretation. Monday morning at work, my boss Carlos asked why I looked like I hadn't slept. I explained the situation while we worked on rotating tires for a customer's truck. "That's rough, hermano," Carlos said, shaking his head. "These HOAs, they get drunk on power." My cousin had something similar happen in Temp, cost him 10 grand in legal fees before they settled. I don't have 10 grand for legal fees. You know what you should do? Make yourself indispensable. Do something that makes them need you. I laughed bitterly. "Like what? Fix Brenda's car." "I'd rather eat glass." But Carlos's words stuck with me throughout the day. Make yourself indispensable. It was a nice idea in theory, but Brenda didn't strike me as someone who'd let personal need override her love of the rules. I kept my word and didn't work on any cars that week. My garage stayed closed, and I ignored the calls from neighbors asking for help. Mrs. Thompson called Tuesday about her son's truck making a grinding noise. I had to tell her to take it to a shop. Mr. Martinez texted Wednesday asking if I could look at his wife's car that wouldn't start. I recommended he call a tow truck. It killed me to turn people away, especially knowing most of them couldn't easily afford professional repair rates. Thursday evening, I was grilling chicken in my backyard when Jerry came over looking worried. "Blake, have you seen what's happening on the neighborhood Facebook page?" I didn't spend much time on social media, so I pulled out my phone and checked the Meadowbrook Estates community group. There was a heated thread with over 60 comments. Someone had posted about me being shut down, and the neighborhood was split. Half the comments supported Brenda, talking about property values and rules. The other half defended me, pointing out how I'd helped them when they were in tough spots, but one comment caught my attention. It was from Brenda herself, posted 2 hours ago. "The rules exist for everyone's benefit. If we make exceptions, chaos follows. Mr. Richardson had ample warning, and he chose to ignore our community standards. The HOA board stands united on this matter. The HOA board stands united." That meant Tom was right. Even if I fought this at the board meeting, Brenda had already lined up the votes. I was screwed. Friday afternoon, I was under a Subaru at work when my phone rang. It was Stanley Chen, the board member I'd mentioned earlier. Stanley was in his 70s, a retired engineer who'd lived in Meadowbrook longer than anyone except the original developers. "Blake, I wanted to call you directly," Stanley said, his voice quiet. "I'm not supposed to discuss board matters, but I thought you should know. Brenda's planning to push for maximum enforcement if you don't comply. She's already drafted a letter to the HOA attorney." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because what she's doing isn't right. You've helped my grandson with his car twice. You're a good neighbor." "But I'm only one vote, and she has Margaret and the Roberts convinced that you're running some kind of chop shop." He sighed. "I'm sorry. I just thought you deserved a heads up." After work, I stopped at a bar near my house and nursed a beer while watching a basketball game I didn't care about. My 72 hours were up tomorrow at noon. I still hadn't figured out what to do: fight and risk losing everything, comply and abandon people who depended on me. Either way felt like losing. I got home around 9 and was about to call it an early night when I heard a car engine making a sound I knew all too well. That distinct knocking that meant serious engine trouble. The kind of problem that, if ignored, would leave someone stranded. The sound was coming from the street. I walked to my front window and looked out. Under the streetlight, I could see a silver Mercedes sedan rolled to a stop at the corner. The driver's door opened, and even from a distance, I recognized that highlighted blonde hair. Brenda Patterson's car had just died right in front of my house. I watched as she got out, staring at her car like it had personally betrayed her. She pulled out her phone, probably calling for a tow truck or roadside assistance. Part of me wanted to close my curtains and pretend I hadn't seen anything. She'd threatened my home, after all. Why should I help her? But that's not who I was. I'd become a mechanic because I liked fixing things, liked helping people solve problems. Even if that person was currently making my life miserable. I grabbed my phone and a flashlight and walked outside. Brenda was still on her phone, her back to me, saying something about needing a tow to the nearest Mercedes dealership. "Brenda," I called out. She spun around, and for a second I saw genuine surprise on her face before her usual stern expression locked back into place. "I don't need your help. Your engine's knocking. That's not a tow truck problem. That's a your engine is about to seize problem. You keep running it and you're looking at 10, maybe 15,000 in repairs." I said I don't need your help, but her voice wavered slightly. "I can call someone." "At 9 o'clock on a Friday night. Good luck getting anyone from the dealership. They're closed, and any emergency mechanic you call is going to charge you triple rate for an after-hours visit." I kept my voice neutral, not gloating, just stating facts. "Let me at least look at it. I can probably tell you what's wrong in 5 minutes." She hesitated, and I could see the war playing out on her face. Pride versus practicality. Authority versus need. "Fine," she said finally, each word sounding like it physically pained her. "But I'm paying you standard rates. This isn't charity." I popped her hood and shined my flashlight on the engine. The problem was obvious immediately. Her serpentine belt had shredded, and pieces of it had gotten sucked into the timing belt area. Oil was leaking from somewhere, probably the valve cover gasket. The knocking sound was coming from the timing being thrown off. "How bad is it?" Brenda asked, standing behind me with her arms wrapped around herself. The temperature had dropped to the low 60s, cold for Scottsdale but not freezing. "Bad. Your serpentine belt is destroyed and it damaged your timing belt when it went. You've got an oil leak too. If you'd kept driving, your engine would have seized within a mile. Can you fix it?" "Not tonight. I'd need parts, but I can fix it tomorrow if you want. It'll take most of the day." She was quiet for a long moment. "How much?" "Parts will run about 400. Labor, I'd normally charge 300 for a job like this. That's less than half what the dealership would charge. I'm aware." Another long silence. Then, "Why are you helping me?" "I've been nothing but difficult to you." I closed her hood and looked at her directly. "Because you need help and I can provide it. That's what neighbors do. At least, that's what I thought we were supposed to do." Something flickered across her face. Shame, maybe, or recognition. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "I'll have it towed to your garage tomorrow morning," she said stiffly. "And I want to pay full professional rates. 800 total." "Brenda, I just told you 700. I know what you told me. 800. I won't be accused of accepting special treatment." She started walking back toward her house, which was about a quarter-mile away, then turned back. "Thank you, Blake. I'll see you tomorrow." I watched her walk away, her arms still wrapped around herself, and wondered if maybe, just maybe, I'd found the crack in her armor. Saturday morning, a tow truck arrived at 8 and dropped Brenda's Mercedes in my driveway. She showed up 10 minutes later, dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, looking more human than I'd ever seen her. "I brought coffee," she said, holding up a tray with 2 cups from the local coffee shop. "Black, right? I've seen you drinking it at community meetings." "Thanks." I took the cup, genuinely surprised. "I should have the parts here within an hour. I ordered them first thing this morning from a supplier who owes me a favor." "Can I watch? I've always been curious about how cars work, but I've never had anyone explain it to me." This was getting stranger by the minute. The HOA president who'd threatened to fine me into bankruptcy was now asking to watch me work and making small talk. But I agreed, and when the parts arrived, I got started. As I worked, I explained what I was doing. How the serpentine belt connected to various components, why timing was so crucial for engine performance, how oil leaks could indicate bigger problems if left unchecked. Brenda listened intently, asking surprisingly insightful questions. "My father was a mechanic," she said during a break. "He worked on diesel engines for trucks. I used to watch him when I was little, but he never really taught me anything, said it wasn't appropriate for girls." She said the last part with obvious bitterness. "That's ridiculous. Some of the best mechanics I know are women. My boss Carlos says his daughter's a natural. She's only 19 and already better at diagnostics than half our senior staff." Brenda smiled, a real genuine smile that transformed her entire face. Things were different in the 80s. My father had very traditional views about what women should and shouldn't do. We fell into a comfortable rhythm after that. I worked, she watched and asked questions, and slowly the conversation drifted beyond cars. She told me about her job as a regional manager for a pharmaceutical company, how stressful it was, how she'd thrown herself into the HOA partly to feel more in control of at least one aspect of her life. Her husband had left her 2 years ago, and their kids were both away at college. The house felt empty and the HOA gave her purpose. "I know I come across as rigid," she admitted around lunchtime. "I'd ordered pizza and we were sitting on my porch eating. People think I enjoy being the rule enforcer, but someone has to maintain standards. If we don't, everything falls apart." "I get that. But there's a difference between maintaining standards and being inflexible. Rules should serve people, not the other way around." She was quiet for a moment, picking at her pizza crust. "You're talking about the business activity clause, among other things." "Yeah." "The covenant is clear, Blake. The covenant also has exceptions. And even if it didn't, shouldn't the board have the discretion to interpret rules based on community benefit? I'm not running a commercial garage. I'm helping neighbors who can't afford to be gouged by dealerships." But where do we draw the line? If we let you repair cars, what's to stop someone else from running a dog grooming business or giving piano lessons loud enough to disturb neighbors? Common sense. A case-by-case evaluation. I set down my pizza. Look, I'm not saying throw out the rules. I'm saying treat your neighbors like people instead of potential violations waiting to happen. Brenda stood up abruptly, and I thought I'd pushed too hard, but she just walked to the edge of the porch, looking out at the street. When my husband left, you want to know what the last thing he said to me was? He said I'd become so obsessed with control that I'd forgotten how to just be human, that I'd rather be right than be happy. I didn't know what to say to that, so I stayed quiet. I got the divorce papers on a Tuesday, she continued. The next day, I attended my first HOA board meeting. The previous president was stepping down and no one else wanted the job, so I volunteered, threw myself into it. Every rule, every violation, every decision. It gave me something to focus on besides my marriage falling apart. Brenda, let me finish. She turned back to face me. Over the past 3 years, I've alienated half the neighborhood. People cross the street to avoid talking to me. I get invited to exactly 0 social gatherings. And I told myself it was fine because I was doing important work, maintaining our community standards. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. It wasn't until last night, standing on the street with my car dead and my phone dying and nowhere to go, that I realized I'd become exactly what my husband said. Someone so obsessed with being right that I'd forgotten how to just be a decent neighbor. I stood up and joined her at the edge of the porch. You know, it's not too late to change that, isn't it? I threatened to put a lien on your house, Blake. I've made your life hell over the past week. True, but you're also here now having a real conversation. That's something. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. I don't know if I can be the person you think I should be. I don't need you to be anyone except maybe a little less rigid, a little more willing to listen. That's all any of us want. We stood there for a moment, then she wiped her eyes and straightened her shoulders. I should let you get back to work. How much longer until the car's finished? Another 3 hours, maybe 4. I want to make sure everything's perfect. I'll come back this evening then. She started to leave, then paused. Blake, thank you for everything. After she left, I got back to work with a strange feeling in my chest. Had I just witnessed a genuine moment of growth, or would Brenda revert to her old self once her car was fixed? I wanted to be optimistic, but I'd seen enough people in my life promise to change only to fall back into old patterns. I finished the Mercedes around 6 in the evening. The engine purred perfectly, all the weird noises gone, oil leak sealed. It was good work, and I felt satisfied in that way you do when you've solved a complicated problem. Brenda returned at 6:30 with Chinese takeout. Peace offering, she said. Also, I figured you probably haven't eaten since lunch. We ate on my porch again, and this time the conversation flowed easily. She asked about my work at the repair shop, about how I'd gotten into mechanics, about my life before Meadowbrook. I told her about growing up in Mesa, about my dad teaching me to work on cars when I was 12, about how I'd almost gone to college for engineering before realizing I preferred working with my hands. The HOA board meeting is in 10 days, Brenda said as we were finishing up. I can't promise anything, but I'm going to recommend we amend the business activity clause to include a good neighbor exception. Something that allows residents to help each other with services like car repair, as long as it doesn't create excessive noise or traffic. I nearly dropped my chopsticks. Seriously. I can't guarantee the rest of the board will vote for it, but I'm going to try. And if they don't, I'll argue for a specific exemption for you based on community benefit. Why the change of heart? She smiled. Because my car broke down and the only person who could help me was someone I'd been treating terribly. That tends to provide perspective. After she left with her repaired car, I sat on my porch for a long time, thinking, maybe people really could change. Maybe all it took was the right catalyst, the right moment of vulnerability to crack through years of defensive behavior. The next week was strange. Word spread through the neighborhood that I'd fixed Brenda's car, and opinions were divided. Some people thought I was a saint for helping someone who'd threatened me. Others thought I was an idiot for not letting her stew in her own consequences. A few suggested I'd somehow manipulated the situation, though I wasn't sure how they thought I'd arranged for her car to break down. Tom Henderson called me Tuesday evening. "Blake, I heard something interesting from Margaret Chen." Margaret was Stanley's wife and also Brenda's best friend on the board. Apparently Brenda's been talking to her about revising the covenant language. Is that true? She mentioned something about it, yeah. Margaret says Brenda's been different this past week, more open, less rigid. Whatever you said to her, it must have really resonated. I didn't say anything special. I just fixed her car and treated her like a human being. Well, whatever you did, keep doing it. We might actually have a shot at this board meeting. Wednesday, I was at work when Carlos pulled me aside. "Hey, remember what I said about making yourself indispensable? Looks like you actually did it. Pure luck." Her car broke down at exactly the right moment. Luck, fate, divine intervention, whatever. Point is, you might have just solved your HOA problem by being a decent person. There's probably a lesson in there somewhere. Thursday evening, I was working on a customer's car at the shop, staying late to finish a transmission job when Brenda called. "Blake, I need your advice." She sounded stressed. "The board meeting is in 6 days and I'm drafting the amendment language. Can you look it over? Make sure I'm not missing anything important." "Sure. Email it to me. I'll take a look tonight." She sent the document an hour later. It was surprisingly well written, creating a new category called neighborly assistance activities that would be exempt from the business prohibition. The criteria included no external signage, no more than 3 client vehicles on property at any given time, no activity between 9 p.m. and 7 a.m., and all work confined to enclosed garages when possible. I called her back. "This is really good, Brenda. Balanced. It protects the neighborhood character while allowing people to help each other." "You really think so?" She sounded genuinely uncertain. "Margaret thinks I'm being too lenient. She says this opens the door to all kinds of problems." "Margaret's wrong. This is exactly the kind of thing that makes a neighborhood stronger, people helping people." "I hope you're right. I'm presenting it Monday night. Will you be there?" "Wouldn't miss it." The weekend passed slowly. Saturday, I helped Jerry with his wife's car. She'd been hearing a rattling noise that turned out to be a loose heat shield, a 5-minute fix. Sunday, the Thompson kid stopped by to ask advice about his truck. I walked him through some basic diagnostic steps he could try himself, teaching him rather than just fixing it for him. Monday arrived with the nervous energy of exam day. The HOA board meeting was at 7 p.m. in the community clubhouse. I showed up 15 minutes early and found the room already half full. Word had clearly spread about what was on the agenda. I recognized most of the faces, neighbors I'd helped, neighbors I'd never spoken to, and a few who'd been vocal on Facebook about supporting Brenda's original enforcement action. Tom Henderson saved me a seat in the 3rd row. "Big night," he said quietly. "I talked to Stanley Chen yesterday. He's definitely voting for the amendment. The question is whether Brenda can convince the Roberts couple." The board members filed in at 7 sharp. Brenda took her seat at the center of the front table, with Margaret to her right, Stanley to her left, and Charles and Patricia Roberts on the ends. Brenda looked nervous, shuffling papers and avoiding eye contact with the audience. "I call this meeting to order," Brenda said, her voice steadier than she looked. "We have several items on tonight's agenda, but first I want to address a matter that's been the subject of significant community discussion. 3 weeks ago, I issued a violation notice to Blake Richardson regarding automotive repair activities conducted on his property. I felt every eye in the room turn toward me. At the time, I believed I was correctly enforcing Section 12, Paragraph 4 of our covenant, which prohibits commercial business activities on residential property. Mr. Richardson was given 72 hours to cease his activities or face substantial fines. Brenda paused, looking down at her notes. However, recent events have caused me to reconsider both my interpretation of the covenant and the spirit in which we should be enforcing our community rules. Margaret shifted uncomfortably in her seat. The Roberts couple exchanged glances. "I have drafted an amendment to Section 12 that would create a new category of permitted activities," Brenda continued, distributing copies of her proposal to the other board members and the audience. "These neighborly assistance activities would allow residents to provide services to each other, including automotive repair, as long as they meet certain reasonable criteria designed to protect our neighborhood character." Margaret raised her hand. "Brenda, I thought we agreed the current language was sufficient." "You thought the current language was sufficient, Margaret. I've reconsidered my position." Brenda's voice was firm but not unkind. "The purpose of our covenant should be to maintain property values and quality of life, not to prevent neighbors from helping each other. Mr. Richardson has been providing a valuable service to our community. People trust him. He charges fair prices. And he's never created the kind of disruption that would justify prohibiting his activities. But what's to stop others from claiming they're just helping neighbors when they're really running businesses?" Charles Roberts asked. He was a banker, methodical and risk-averse. "The criteria I've outlined," Brenda replied. "No signage, limited vehicles, quiet hours, enclosed workspace. These restrictions ensure we're talking about genuine neighborly assistance, not commercial operations disguised as favors." Stanley cleared his throat. "I support this amendment. I've lived in Meadowbrook for 22 years, and I've seen us become increasingly rigid about enforcement. We used to be a community. Now we're a collection of isolated households afraid of violating arbitrary rules. This amendment is a step back toward neighborliness." "I agree with Stanley," I heard someone say from the audience. It was Mrs. Martinez, whose husband I'd helped several times. "Blake's helped half the people in this room. When my car died last winter and we couldn't afford the dealership quote, Blake fixed it for a quarter of the price. We would have lost my husband's car otherwise. That's what neighbors should do." Other people started speaking up, sharing their own stories. Jerry talked about his brakes. Tom mentioned his wife's minivan. Even people I didn't recognize well spoke about how they'd benefited from having an honest mechanic in the neighborhood. But not everyone was supportive. A man I recognized from Facebook, one of the vocal rule enforcement advocates, stood up. "This is exactly the slippery slope I warned about. Today it's car repair. Tomorrow someone wants to run a daycare. Next week someone's giving drum lessons. Where does it end?" "It ends where the criteria say it ends," Brenda responded. "Activities that meet the neighborly assistance standards are permitted. Activities that don't aren't. It's really that simple." The debate continued for another 30 minutes. Margaret remained opposed, arguing that any loosening of restrictions would damage property values. Patricia Roberts seemed sympathetic, but worried about implementation details. Charles Roberts was on the fence, asking careful questions about specifics. Finally, Brenda called for a vote. All in favor of adopting the proposed amendment to Section 12. Stanley's hand went up immediately. After a moment, Patricia Roberts raised hers. Charles Roberts hesitated, then slowly lifted his hand, 3 votes in favor. Margaret abstained, making her disapproval clear. Brenda raised her own hand, making it 4 in favor. The amendment passes, Brenda announced. Section 12 is hereby modified to include the neighborly assistance category. Mr. Richardson, your violation notice is rescinded. You're welcome to continue helping your neighbors as long as you comply with the new criteria. The room erupted in applause, though not everyone joined in. I sat there feeling like I just won a lottery I hadn't known I'd entered. After the meeting, dozens of people came up to congratulate me or thank Brenda for her change of heart. She handled it all with grace, accepting both praise and criticism without becoming defensive. When the crowd finally thinned out, I approached her. "Thank you. I know that wasn't easy." "It was the right thing to do," she said simply. "I spent 3 years being the kind of HOA president who values rules over people. I'd like to spend whatever time I have left in this position being a different kind of leader. Think the neighborhood will give you that chance?" She glanced around the now mostly empty room. "I don't know. I've burned a lot of bridges, but I have to try." Over the next few weeks, things gradually shifted in Meadowbrook Estates. Brenda started attending neighborhood social events she'd previously avoided. She joined a book club that met at the community center. She even volunteered to help organize the annual 4th of July barbecue, something the previous president had done, but she declined in past years. People were cautious at first, remembering the rigid rule enforcer she'd been. But Brenda was patient, consistently showing up and being present without trying to control everything. Slowly, guardedly, the neighborhood started warming to her. Margaret, on the other hand, remained frosty. She and Brenda had been close friends, and Margaret clearly felt betrayed by Brenda's change in approach. I saw them at the grocery store once, and the tension was palpable. They greeted each other politely but coldly, like acquaintances rather than friends who'd once spent hours together discussing neighborhood governance. My life returned to something approaching normal. I continued working on cars, now with the explicit approval of the HOA. The new criteria weren't burdensome. 3 vehicles at once was more than enough, and I always worked during reasonable hours anyway. A few neighbors who'd been hesitant to ask for help before, worried about getting me in trouble, now felt comfortable reaching out. One Thursday evening about a month after the board meeting, I was finishing an oil change on Mrs. Henderson's minivan when Brenda pulled up in her Mercedes. She'd had no mechanical issues since I fixed it, but she stopped by occasionally just to chat. "Got a minute?" she asked. "Sure, just wrapping up here." We sat on my porch with cold beers, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and purple. Arizona sunsets were spectacular in April. "I wanted to tell you something," Brenda said after a few minutes of comfortable silence. "I'm not running for HOA president again. My term ends in September and I'm stepping down." "Really? Why? I thought things were going well." "They are. Better than they've been in years, but I think the neighborhood needs a fresh start with someone who wasn't the tyrannical rule enforcer, someone who can lead without that baggage." "Who's going to run?" Stanley said he'd do it if enough people support him, and Tom Henderson is considering it too. Either would be excellent. She took a sip of her beer. "I'm going to stay on the board as a regular member, but I think it's time for someone else to set the direction." "That's very self-aware of you," she laughed. "Therapy helps. I started going a few weeks ago. Turns out my ex-husband was right about more than just the control issues. I've been working through a lot. Good for you, seriously. I also wanted to thank you again." Not just for fixing my car, but for showing me that it's possible to be both principled and compassionate. That rules can serve people instead of the other way around. I think you knew that already. You just needed a reminder. We sat there as the sky darkened. Two neighbors who'd started as adversaries and somehow ended up as friends. It wasn't the ending I'd expected when I'd seen Brenda standing in my driveway with her folder of violations. But it was a good ending, the kind where everyone grows and learns and ends up better than they started. The next few months passed smoothly. Stanley Chen won the election for HOA president in September, running on a platform of reasonable enforcement and community building. Brenda kept her word about staying on as a regular board member, and her presence actually helped. She knew the covenant inside and out, and she could explain the rationale behind various rules without being rigid about enforcement. In October, something unexpected happened. Mrs. Martinez called me on a Tuesday evening, her voice panicked. "Blake, I just saw Margaret Patterson putting up signs around the neighborhood. They say you're operating an illegal business and they list your address. What's going on?" I drove around the neighborhood and found them. About 20 signs on wooden stakes, planted in common areas and on the corners near my street. They read, "Illegal auto shop at 847 Saguaro Drive. Demand HOA enforcement. Protect our property values." My stomach sank. After months of peace, apparently someone was still fighting old battles. I pulled one of the signs out and took a photo, then called Tom Henderson. As a lawyer, he'd know if this was crossing any legal lines. "That's defamation," Tom said immediately. "You're not operating illegally. You're explicitly permitted under the amended covenant. Margaret is making false statements of fact that could damage your reputation. You could sue her." "I don't want to sue her. I just want her to stop. Let me make some calls. This needs to be addressed tonight." Within an hour, Stanley Chen called an emergency board meeting. Since it was emergency business, the meeting could be held with just 24 hours' notice instead of the usual week. Tom helped me draft a cease and desist letter to Margaret, and Stanley personally went to her house to deliver it along with a notice that she'd be required to remove all signs immediately or face HOA fines for posting unauthorized signage in common areas. Margaret tried to argue that she had free speech rights, but Tom shut that down quickly. Free speech protects you from government censorship, not from consequences for defamation. Blake's automotive repair activities are explicitly permitted. Your signs falsely claim they are illegal. That's defamatory per se. The emergency board meeting the next night was tense. Margaret showed up with her own lawyer, a tired-looking man in an expensive suit who clearly wished he was somewhere else. Stanley opened the meeting by reviewing the facts. "Margaret, you placed approximately 20 signs around the neighborhood yesterday claiming that Blake Richardson is operating an illegal auto shop. This is factually false. His activities are permitted under Section 12, Paragraph 4, Subsection C of our covenant, as amended in May. You have violated multiple provisions of our rules regarding signage in common areas, and you have potentially committed defamation against Mr. Richardson. I have the right to express my opinion about what's happening in our neighborhood," Margaret said, her voice sharp. "You have the right to express opinions," her lawyer corrected quietly. "You don't have the right to make false statements of fact. It's not false. He's running a business. He's providing neighborly assistance services," Brenda interjected, "as explicitly permitted by our covenant." "Margaret, you voted against that amendment, but you lost. It passed. You don't get to ignore board decisions just because you disagreed with them." Margaret's face flushed red. "This is because you chose him over our friendship. You threw away 3 years of friendship for some mechanic who batted his eyes at you. The room went dead silent. That was way over the line, and everyone knew it. "That's enough," Stanley said firmly. "Margaret, you have 24 hours to remove every sign you posted. You're also fined $500 for unauthorized signage in common areas. If you post anything similar again, the fine will be $5,000 and we'll pursue legal action for harassment." Margaret stood up abruptly. "I resign from this board. I won't be part of an organization that's abandoned its principles." "Your resignation is accepted," Stanley said without hesitation. Margaret stormed out, her lawyer trailing behind her apologetically. The rest of us sat in stunned silence. "Well," Brenda said finally, "that went about as badly as it could have." "She'll get over it," Patricia Roberts said. "Or she won't. Either way, she crossed a line." The signs came down overnight. Margaret or someone she hired must have removed them, because by morning they were all gone. I never found out if she took Stanley's warning seriously or if her lawyer convinced her to back off. 2 weeks later, Margaret listed her house for sale. Stanley heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she was moving to Sun City, one of those age-restricted communities with even stricter rules than Meadowbrook had ever had. It seemed fitting somehow. She'd be happier in a place where rigidity was the norm rather than the exception. November rolled around, and with it came the neighborhood Thanksgiving potluck. It was an annual tradition, held in the community center with everyone bringing dishes to share. I'd never attended before, usually working late on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving to help people get their cars ready for holiday travel. This year, though, Carlos gave everyone at the shop Wednesday afternoon off. "Go be with your community," he said. "The cars can wait." I brought a green bean casserole, my mom's recipe, and showed up at the community center at 5 p.m. The place was packed. Kids ran around while adults socialized and set up serving tables groaning under the weight of turkey, ham, casseroles, salads, and desserts. Brenda found me near the drinks table. "Blake, I'm glad you came. I wasn't sure you would. First time for everything. This is quite the spread. Wait until you try Mrs. Chen's pumpkin pie. It's life-changing." We filled plates and found seats at a long table with Jerry, Tom Henderson and his wife, the Martinez family, and several other neighbors I'd gotten to know. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by laughter and the comfortable rhythm of people who genuinely liked each other. At one point, Stanley stood up and clinked his glass for attention. "Before we all go into food comas, I wanted to say a few words. This year has been one of change for Meadowbrook Estates. We've had disagreements, difficult decisions, and some painful conflicts. But we've also rediscovered something important. We're not just a homeowner association, we're a community. Neighbors helping neighbors. People caring about people, not just property values and rule enforcement." He raised his glass. "So here's to second chances, to growth. To the kind of neighborhood where someone can fix your car, watch your kids, or bring you soup when you're sick, all without worrying about violation notices. Here's to actually being neighborly. Here's to Blake," someone shouted, and suddenly everyone was toasting me. I felt my face flush as glasses raised around the room. "Here's to Brenda too," Tom added, "for having the courage to admit she was wrong and the integrity to make it right." More cheers. Brenda looked uncomfortable with the attention but accepted it gracefully. After dinner, as people were cleaning up, a young couple I'd never met approached me. They looked nervous, probably in their late 20s. "Mr. Richardson, I'm David Palmer and this is my wife Hannah. We just bought the house on Ocotillo Drive, the one that's been empty for 6 months." "Welcome to the neighborhood," I said, shaking their hands. "We wanted to introduce ourselves because, well, we heard about what you do. I'm starting a new job in January and money's going to be tight for a while." Our car has been making this weird clicking sound and we're worried about how much it'll cost to fix." David looked embarrassed. "We were wondering if maybe you could take a look at it. We can't pay much, but we could do trade work. I'm a graphic designer and Hannah's a teacher." I smiled. "Bring it by Saturday morning. Let's see what we're dealing with. And don't worry about payment right now. We'll work something out." The relief on their faces was palpable. "Thank you so much. Everyone we've met has told us how lucky we are to live in a neighborhood with you here." After they left, Brenda appeared at my elbow. "Look at you, the neighborhood hero." "Hardly. I just fix cars." "You do more than that, and you know it. You remind people that communities are supposed to take care of each other." I helped stack chairs while the cleanup crew worked. By 7:30, the community center was back in order, and people were heading home, carrying containers of leftovers and promises to see each other soon. Walking back to my house in the cool November evening, I thought about how much had changed since that Saturday in April when Brenda had showed up in my driveway with her violation notice. 6 months and everything was different. The neighborhood felt different, warmer, more connected. My phone buzzed with a text from Carlos. "Happy Thanksgiving, Hermano. Grateful to have you on my team." I texted back thanks and kept walking. Lights glowed in windows. Somewhere a dog barked. A couple walked past holding hands, nodding hello. Normal neighborhood stuff, except it didn't feel normal. It felt special in the way that ordinary things become special when you almost lose them. December brought cooler weather and holiday decorations. The HOA had rules about those too, of course, but Stanley's interpretation was much more relaxed than Brenda's had been. As long as lights came down by mid-January and displays weren't obnoxious, people had freedom to celebrate however they wanted. I helped hang lights for Mrs. Henderson, whose arthritis made ladder climbing dangerous. Jerry invited me to his family's Hanukkah celebration. The Martinez family included me in their Christmas Eve tamale-making tradition, which I'd never experienced before but thoroughly enjoyed. Brenda hosted a New Year's Eve party at her house, the first social event she'd thrown in years. She was nervous about whether anyone would come, but more than 30 neighbors showed up. We counted down to midnight, shared champagne, and sang Auld Lang Syne off key but enthusiastically. At 12:15, as the party was winding down, Brenda and I found ourselves on her back patio, watching fireworks bloom in the distance over Scottsdale. "I have a confession," Brenda said. "When my car broke down that night in April, part of me knew you'd come out to help. I could have called my daughter to pick me up. I could have walked home and dealt with it the next day, but I waited, hoping you'd see me struggling and offer assistance. Really. I think some part of me wanted an excuse to see you as a person instead of a violation. Wanted to find a way out of the corner I'd painted myself into." She laughed softly. "The universe gave me exactly what I needed, even if I didn't consciously realize I was asking for it. I'm glad your car broke down then." "Me too. Strangest thing to be grateful for, but here we are." We stood in comfortable silence, watching the last fireworks fade. The new year stretched ahead, full of possibility. January brought the new neighbors fully into the community fold. David and Hannah Palmer's car had needed new CV joints, a job I completed for cost of parts plus $100. Hannah insisted on tutoring a couple of neighborhood kids who were struggling with math, refusing payment. David designed a new Meadowbrook Estates newsletter header for free. The cycle of neighborly assistance continued. On a Thursday afternoon, I was at the shop doing a routine inspection on a customer's BMW when my phone rang. Unknown number with a local area code. "Blake Richardson. This is Detective Amy Larson with Scottsdale Police Department. Do you have a few minutes to talk?" My stomach dropped. "You never want to hear from the police." Sure. What's this about? We're investigating a complaint filed by Margaret Patterson. She claims you've been harassing her and damaging her property. Specifically, she says you've been leaving threatening notes on her car and spray-painted graffiti on her garage door before she moved out. That's insane. I haven't had any contact with Margaret since she resigned from the HOA board in October. I've never threatened her or damaged anything. That's what several of your neighbors told us too. We've interviewed about a dozen people and they all say you're not the type, but I need to ask you directly. Did you have any contact with Miss Patterson between her resignation and her moving out in early November? No, none. I saw her at the grocery store once from a distance, but we didn't speak. Can anyone verify your whereabouts on November 8th between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m.? That's when the graffiti incident allegedly occurred. I thought back. November 8th. Yeah, actually, I was at Jerry Wilson's house. He lives at 823 Sagaro Drive. We were watching a football game. Raiders versus Jets Sunday night game. I was there until about 1 a.m. Jerry Wilson, you said? Yeah, and his wife Gloria was there too. We had wings and beer and watched the game. I remember because the game went into overtime and I was exhausted the next day at work. Okay, that's helpful. One more thing. Do you know anyone who might want to frame you for this? Anyone with a grudge? Besides Margaret, no, and I don't think she'd frame me. She's rigid and angry, but she's not criminal. People surprise you sometimes. Thank you for your cooperation, Mr. Richardson. We'll be in touch if we need anything else. I called Jerry immediately after hanging up. Did the police call you about November 8th? Yeah, about an hour ago. Some detective asking if you were at my house watching the game. I told her you were here until past midnight. What's going on? I explained about Margaret's accusations. Jerry was outraged on my behalf, promising to call the detective back and give a more detailed statement if needed. Next, I called Tom Henderson and explained the situation. Do I need a lawyer? Probably not, but I'll make some calls and find out what's really going on. Margaret moved to Sun City, right? Why would she suddenly file a complaint about something that allegedly happened months ago? No idea. The whole thing is bizarre. Tom called back 2 hours later with news. Okay, I talked to a friend in the DA's office. Apparently Margaret's been making increasingly erratic accusations against multiple people. She filed complaints against you, against Brenda, against Stanley Chen. She claims there's a conspiracy to devalue her property and force her out of the neighborhood. That's ridiculous. Of course it is. The police have investigated all her claims and found zero evidence. They interviewed neighbors, checked security camera footage from houses near hers, everything. You're completely clear. They're actually considering filing charges against her for filing false reports, but they're trying to determine if she's mentally unstable versus maliciously lying. Jesus, I didn't realize she'd gotten that bad. Apparently the move to Sun City hasn't helped. She's gotten into disputes with her new HOA there too. Some people just can't let go of their need for control and conflict. The police never contacted me again. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that Margaret had been ordered to undergo a psychological evaluation and was prohibited from filing any further complaints without evidence. I felt bad for her in a way. She'd let her need for control consume her to the point of self-destruction. February arrived with warmer weather and the first hints of spring. Arizona didn't have dramatic season changes like other parts of the country, but you could feel the shift. Birds returned. Flowers bloomed. The air smelled fresh. I was changing spark plugs on a Toyota one Saturday when Stanley Chen stopped by. Blake, got a minute? Sure. What's up? The board wants to thank you properly for what you've done for this neighborhood. We're planning to recognize you at next month's annual meeting. That's really not necessary. Maybe not, but we want to do it anyway. You've helped dozens of families save thousands of dollars. More importantly, you reminded us what it means to be neighbors. That deserves recognition. The annual meeting was a bigger deal than the monthly board meetings. Everyone attended to hear about the budget, upcoming projects, and election of board members. The meeting was held in the community center on a Saturday in mid-March, and the turnout was impressive. After the business portion, Stanley stood at the podium and called me to the front. I walked up reluctantly, hating being the center of attention. Blake Richardson joined our community 5 years ago, Stanley began. For most of that time, he was simply a good neighbor, quiet, friendly, always willing to lend a hand. But last year, he became something more. He became a symbol of what Meadowbrook Estates could be at its best. Stanley talked about the covenant dispute, about Brenda's change of heart, about the amendment that now allowed neighborly assistance. He talked about all the families I'd helped, the money saved, the relationships built. Blake didn't just fix cars, Stanley concluded. He fixed our community. He reminded us that rules should serve people, not the other way around. On behalf of the board and everyone here, thank you. The applause was thunderous. People stood. I felt my face burning with embarrassment, but also with genuine gratitude. Stanley handed me a plaque that read, Blake Richardson, Neighbor of the Year for service above and beyond. As I returned to my seat, Brenda caught my eye and mouthed, thank you. Not for the recognition, but for everything that had led to this moment. The meeting ended with elections. Stanley was re-elected president unanimously. Brenda kept her board seat. Tom Henderson joined as a new member. The Roberts couple decided to step down, and 2 younger residents took their places, people who'd been vocal about wanting a more community-focused HOA. After the meeting, dozens of people came up to congratulate me or share stories about how I'd helped them. The young couple, David and Hannah Palmer, introduced me to their parents, who were visiting from Oregon. Mrs. Chen gave me a hug that nearly cracked my ribs. Even people I'd never worked with wanted to shake my hand. As the crowd finally dispersed, I found myself alone in the parking lot with Brenda. We'd become genuine friends over the past year, meeting for coffee occasionally, attending the same social events, having real conversations about life beyond HOA politics. So, Neighbor of the Year, she said with a smile. How does it feel? Surreal. A year ago you were threatening to put a lien on my house. Now I'm getting plaques. A year ago I was a completely different person. Or maybe I was always this person, just buried under layers of fear and control issues. She leaned against her Mercedes, the same one I'd repaired that fateful night. I've been thinking about something. Remember when you said rules should serve people? Yeah. I used to think that was naive, that without strict enforcement, everything would fall apart. But this past year has taught me that the opposite is true. When you trust people and give them room to be human, communities actually get stronger, not weaker. I think you knew that all along. You just forgot for a while, maybe, she smiled. Anyway, thank you. For fixing my car, for being patient with me, for showing me there was a better way. Thank you for being brave enough to change. We stood there in the empty parking lot as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. 2 people who'd started as adversaries, found common ground, and helped transform a neighborhood in the process. I drove home that evening thinking about community, about what it means to be a good neighbor, about second chances and growth. My little split-level house looked welcoming in the twilight, the porch light casting a warm glow. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed a car parked on the street. A young woman got out, looking nervous. She was maybe 25, driving a Nissan that sounded like it had an exhaust leak. Are you Blake Richardson? she asked. "That's me. I'm Emily Martin. I just moved to Meadowbrook last week. My neighbor Mrs. Henderson said you might be able to help with my car. It's making this awful noise and I just started a new job and I can't afford a huge repair bill right now." She looked close to tears. "I know it's late and you probably want to relax, but I didn't know who else to call." I looked at her worn work uniform, at the stress lines around her eyes, at the car that clearly needed help. I thought about all the times someone had helped me when I needed it. About the community we'd built here in Meadowbrook, based on trust and mutual support. "Pop your hood," I said, grabbing my flashlight from the garage. "Let's see what we're dealing with." As I examined her exhaust system in the fading light, I heard her sigh with relief. This was what it meant to be a neighbor. Not following rules for the sake of rules, but helping people because that's what communities do. The exhaust leak was fixable. Everything was fixable, really, if you had the right tools and the willingness to try. Cars, communities, relationships. All it took was patience, skill, and the understanding that sometimes the most important repairs weren't about machines at all. They were about people learning to trust each other again, to help without keeping score, to build something bigger than themselves. That's what we'd done here in Meadowbrook Estates. And that's what I'd keep doing, one neighbor at a time, for as long as they needed me. The story of the HOA that tried to shut me down had become the story of a community that learned to open up instead. And standing there in my driveway on a March evening, helping a stranger who'd become a neighbor simply by moving to our street, I couldn't imagine being anywhere else.